The special little girl looked at the floor and whispered, "This isn't for me, Mommy." The stepmother made her eat from the dog's bowl, but when the millionaire father arrived, he did something unimaginable. The silence in the Sterling mansion had a weight and a color. It was a white silence, like the polished marble of the floors, and heavy as the thick velvet curtains that barred the sun. For 7-year-old Alice, the silence was the most important rule of the house, more so than not running in the halls or not touching the crystal vases. She understood the rules through the air. By the way, her stepmother Beatrice's shoulders tensed when a piece of silverware clinked too loudly against the china. So that Sunday, Alice was trying to be invisible. Seated at the dining table, a vast slab of polished mahogany that reflected her face like a dark lake. She moved her fork with the delicacy of someone dismantling a house of cards. Her little feet, dangling in the air, didn't dare touch the legs of the chair. Beside her, her father, Richard, a man whose presence was as grand as his absence, was on the phone. His words were a constant background noise in Alice's life, a melody of figures and promises. "The investment in crypto is volatile, but the return is worth it," he was saying to an unseen caller, his voice calm, like a man commanding an empire. "We've increased our net worth by 12% this quarter." Alice didn't understand stocks, dividends, or the market, but she knew these were the words that took her father away and brought him back with presents that smelled like airports. Beatrice, seated at the head of the table, was the queen of this kingdom of appearances. Her smile was a work of art, perfectly designed to hide what she felt. She watched Alice with a gaze that mixed vigilance with a kind of patient exhaustion, like someone handling a delicate but troublesome object. "Eat slowly, darling," she said, her voice a soft velvet that scratched at Alice's skin. "Proper people don't rush." Alice nodded, her little heart beating out of rhythm. She just wanted to be good, good enough for Beatrice's smile to reach her eyes, for her father to hang up the phone and truly see her. It was in this effort, this desperate quest for perfection, that her small hand trembled. One grain of rice, then another and another, fell from her fork and landed on the immaculate white linen tablecloth. The sound was minuscule, almost non-existent, but in the acoustics of that dining room, it echoed like thunder. Richard didn't notice, engrossed in a conversation about dollars and interest rates, but Beatrice saw. Her smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes hardened, like glass cooling too quickly. Alice held her breath, her eyes fixed on the tiny white dots that stained the table's perfection. "Oh, no," she whispered, the apology already forming on her lips. Beatrice rose slowly, the elegance of her movements almost theatrical. She took a napkin and, instead of simply wiping, made a grand gesture as if presenting Alice's failure to an invisible audience. Leaning over the table, she gathered the grains of rice and murmured, her voice low enough for only Alice to hear clearly, "Don't you worry, dear. In this house, everything has its place." Alice tried to help, reaching out to take the soiled napkin, but Beatrice pulled it away with a firm gentleness. "Leave it. I'll take care of it." It was a small gesture, an almost imperceptible refusal, but to Alice, it was as if a door had been slammed in her face. She shrank back in her chair, feeling her stepmother's gaze weighing on her. In that instant, she was no longer a little girl who had spilled some food. She was a piece out of place, a stain on the perfect fabric of the family that Beatrice worked so hard to weave. And as her father continued to build his fortune over the phone, Alice felt the first scratch on her confidence, a fine, cold fissure beginning to open in her small world. In the days that followed the rice incident, the Sterling mansion plunged into a routine of ostentatious perfection. Every object seemed to have found its final place. Every sound was measured, every gesture rehearsed. Alice, with her heightened sensitivity, felt the change like a shift in air pressure. The silence was no longer just heavy, it was vigilant. She took refuge in her bedroom, a sanctuary of soft colors and meticulous order. There, she would spend hours arranging her few toys in precise rows, organizing her pencils by shades of color, an activity that calmed the small storm in her chest. It was her way of trying to fix what she felt she had broken. On Tuesday, Beatrice entered her room without knocking, carrying a large, rectangular gift box tied with a silk ribbon. Her smile was the same as that Sunday, flawless and distant. "A gift for my well-behaved girl," she said, her voice a cloying whisper. Alice opened the box carefully, her heart caught between hope and fear. Inside was a sky-blue organza dress, with bows on the shoulders and a stiff, full skirt. It was a dress for a doll, not for a girl who liked to feel the ground beneath her feet. "So you'll always look beautiful and proper," Beatrice continued, touching the fabric with her fingertips. "A family's wealth is measured by the image it projects." Alice murmured a thank you, the sound almost inaudible. She took the dress, feeling the cold, rigid texture of the fabric, and folded it with surgical precision, placing it at the bottom of a drawer with other similar gifts: hair bows she never wore, patent leather shoes that hurt her feet. They were evidence of a love she didn't understand, a love that demanded she be someone else. That evening, her father arrived, the scent of travel still clinging to his suit jacket. He gave her a quick kiss on the forehead. "I brought you something," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. It was a gold necklace with a tiny pendant. Richard smiled, a tired smile. "It's real gold. All our assets will be yours one day." He pulled her onto his lap for a moment, his phone vibrating incessantly in his pocket. "I have to go, sweetie. Closing an important deal. Daddy will be back soon." And he was gone, leaving behind the cold gleam of the metal and the empty promise of a return that was never complete. From the half-open door, Clara, the discreet housekeeper who had cared for the house for years, observed the scene. Her eyes, accustomed to seeing what was left unsaid, noted the way Alice held the necklace for a second before putting it away in the same drawer as the dress. Clara noted mentally, girls' room, bottom drawer, untouched gifts. She was a woman of few words and much observation, and her little notebook, tucked into her apron pocket, was beginning to fill with small entries. A diary of her uneasy conscience. Later that night, Beatrice passed by the hallway and stopped before Alice's room. The door was slightly ajar. She peered inside. The girl wasn't sleeping. Sitting on the rug, under the dim light of a lamp, she was playing, not with the porcelain dolls Beatrice had bought, nor with the electronic toys her father had brought from his travels. She was stacking old, simple, worn wooden blocks, building a small, crooked tower. The gold necklace lay forgotten on the dresser. A crease of impatience formed between Beatrice's eyebrows. That simplicity offended her. The girl needed to be polished, molded, and she would do it, whatever it took. Wednesday dawned grey, the sky the color of molten lead, and the weather's melancholy seemed to have seeped through the cracks of the mansion. It was the day Richard left. His departure was a whirlwind of rushed movements and businesslike words. He kissed the top of Alice's head, the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with the aroma of strong coffee. "Daddy has to go to Zurich," he said, adjusting his silk tie. "It's a meeting about diversifying our assets, a chance to expand our capital into euros." Alice just nodded, clutching the hem of her pajamas. She wanted to ask him to stay, to have a breakfast without the rush, but the words refused to come out. She knew these trips were what kept the lights on in the house and filled her drawers with cold gifts. Beatrice stood beside him, the personification of the perfect wife, handing him his leather briefcase. "Have a good trip, my love. Bring back good profits," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Alice watched as her father got into the shiny black car, the engine purring softly before disappearing through the iron gates. The sound of the car driving away was like a period at the end of a sentence. The moment the gate closed, the atmosphere inside the house shifted. The air grew thicker, colder. Beatrice turned, and the farewell smile dissolved like smoke. Her face took on an expression of calculated efficiency. "Now that we're alone, Alice, we're going to have a little more discipline in this house." Her voice was no longer velvet, it had the cutting edge of steel. That same afternoon, a whiteboard appeared in the hallway off the kitchen with a schedule written in perfectly aligned letters. 8 a.m., breakfast. 9 a.m., lessons. 11 a.m., silent time in room. 12:30 p.m., lunch, and so on, every minute of Alice's day mapped and timed. The doors, which were once left open, were now gently closed. The house, once full of echoes, became a labyrinth of silent, isolated rooms. Clara, the housekeeper, watched everything from a distance, her heart aching. She saw Alice trying to adapt, moving through the house like a small ghost, her shoulders slumped, her gaze always downcast. During silent time, Clara passed the girl's room and saw her sitting on the bed, hands in her lap, staring at the wall. She wasn't playing, not reading, just existing inside the square of time assigned to her. Later, while polishing silverware in the kitchen, Clara took out her little notebook and wrote in a shaky hand, "The house changed. He left, and the joy went with him. A schedule for everything, even for being quiet." That evening, after a tense, silent dinner, where Alice's every bite was supervised by Beatrice, the girl went up to her room. She burrowed under the covers, hugging her stuffed rabbit, the only object that held a remnant of warmth and comfort. Beatrice came in to say goodnight. There was no story, no lullaby, just a curt "sleep well" and the click of the light switch. Alice closed her eyes, waiting to hear her stepmother's footsteps fade down the hall. Instead, she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. A small, metallic, and definitive sound. The sound of the key turning in the lock from the outside. She sat up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was locked in. The silence that followed was no longer white or heavy. It was a dark, suffocating silence. The silence of a cage. The morning light that streamed through the crack in the window was what woke Alice. For a moment, the fear of the previous night enveloped her like a cold blanket. She got up and ran to the door, her small hand trembling as she turned the knob. It opened. It was unlocked. The absence of the obstacle was almost more confusing than its presence. Had she dreamt it? Beatrice was already waiting for her in the hallway, a fresh, morning smile on her face. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Ready for our day?" She didn't mention the door, Alice's silent tears, nothing. Her stepmother's normality was a powerful weapon, one that made Alice doubt her own perception, making her feel small and foolish. The day proceeded under the dictatorship of the whiteboard, a succession of silent tasks and timed meals. Alice felt more and more like a wind-up doll, moving through the impeccable sets of the house, performing the expected movements, afraid that the spring would run out and she would stop in the wrong place. That evening, the routine was broken by the arrival of a guest, Oliver, a friend and business partner of her father's, a man with an easy laugh who talked about the stock market as if it were a football team. He brought Beatrice a bouquet of white lilies, which she accepted with calculated delight. "No, Richard tells me your portfolio has grown exponentially," Oliver said, admiring the dining room. "He has a Midas touch," Beatrice smiled. "He's brilliant, and I make sure he has a perfect home to return to." Dinner was served. Alice sat between the two adults, feeling like a small centerpiece on display. She ate slowly, her attention focused on not spilling anything, on not making a sound. Oliver, charmed by his hostess, took out his phone. "I'm going to send a video to Richard," he said, laughing, "so he can see the Queen in her castle." He started recording, framing Beatrice with the crystal glasses and the lilies in the background. Beatrice, in her element, told some story about the house's decor. Alice, for a moment, relaxed her vigilance and looked at Oliver's smiling face. It was then that Beatrice, still smiling for the camera, turned her gaze to Alice and said, her voice casual, as if making a witty remark, "We're working on her table manners. Children are like little animals, aren't they? You have to train them. The girl needs to learn how to act like a person." Oliver's laughter filled the silence that followed. He didn't notice the venom in the sweetness. To him it was a harmless joke, but to Alice, the words landed like stones. She lowered her eyes to her plate, the food suddenly blurring through the tears she fought to hold back. Like a person, the phrase echoed in her head. So, what was she now? From the kitchen doorway, Clara saw everything. She saw Beatrice's smile, heard the cruel phrase, saw Oliver's phone recording, and saw the small light in Alice's eyes go out. Her face remained a professional mask, but in her chest, a cold fury began to build. Later, after Oliver had left, Beatrice put Alice to bed. She arranged the covers with an efficiency devoid of affection. "You were a good girl at dinner tonight," she said, her voice neutral. "See how it isn't so difficult." Alice didn't answer, just curled up in her bed. Beatrice went to the door and paused in the frame. For a second, Alice hoped she would leave it open, that tonight would be different. But then she heard the sound, the soft, terrible click of the key turning in the lock. It hadn't been a dream. It was real, and it was happening again. Friday arrived with a fine, persistent rain that tapped against the mansion's window panes like impatient fingers. The sound of the rain was the only noise that broke the controlled monotony imposed by Beatrice. For Alice, the rain was a companion, her silent tears mingling with those that streamed down the glass. The ritual of the locked doors at night had become a cruel routine. Alice no longer cried. A heavy resignation had settled in her small heart. She would just lie down, hug her stuffed rabbit, and wait for sleep, a temporary refuge from the silk cage she lived in. During the day, the tension was palpable. Beatrice seemed to find a peculiar satisfaction in her newfound authority. She corrected Alice's posture, the way she held her fork, the volume of her voice. Each correction was made with a cutting calm, a smile that never reached her eyes. "We must maintain standards," she would say, as if managing one of her investment funds. "Appearances are our most valuable asset." Clara, the housekeeper, moved through the house like a shadow, her eyes registering every detail. The notebook in her pocket was getting fuller. She noted the meals Alice barely touched, the hours the girl spent staring into space, the sound of the key in the lock that she heard from downstairs. Her heart ached for this child who seemed to shrink with each passing day. She wanted to do something, but what? Report Beatrice. Richard would never believe her over the word of his flawless wife. She was just an employee. Her testimony would be worth little against the sterling fortune and prestige. Saturday afternoon brought a change in the routine. Beatrice decided that the family dog, a golden retriever named Apollo, should eat inside because of the rain. She placed Apollo's food bowl in the corner of the breakfast nook near the door to the garden. The strong smell of the dog food mixed with the aroma of the roast in the oven, creating a strange, nauseating odor. Alice was sitting at the nook's table, finishing her lunch under Beatrice's watchful eye. She ate slowly, each forkful a mission not to make a mistake. Apollo, beside her, ate his food with a noisy appetite. Alice watched the dog for a moment. The simplicity of its joy, the way it didn't worry about rules or appearances. A small smile formed on her lips, the first in days. Beatrice noticed the look and the smile, and in her controlling mind, a cruel and distorted idea began to take shape. She stood up and walked to the table. Her shadow fell over Alice. "You seem fascinated by the way Apollo eats," she said, her voice dangerously soft. Alice didn't understand, just looked up, her eyes wide and innocent. Without another word, with a movement that seemed both slow and shockingly fast, Beatrice took Alice's plate, a fillet of sea bass with mashed potatoes, and placed it on the floor. The fine china made a sharp click against the marble. The plate sat there, next to Apollo's bowl, where a few pieces of kibble were scattered. Alice looked from the plate on the floor to Beatrice's face, confusion and fear mounting in her eyes. "What?" she whispered. Beatrice crouched down, bringing herself to Alice's level, her smile now a mask of false sweetness. "You want to eat like a little animal? Then eat like one." The command was absurd, unbelievable, but the authority in Beatrice's voice was absolute. Alice hesitated, tears beginning to burn her eyes. The smell of kibble and fish mixed. Turning her stomach, she looked toward the door, hoping Clara would appear, that someone would save her. But the house was silent, except for the sound of the rain outside and her own breath caught in her throat. The fear of displeasing, the need to be good that had been hammered into her mind, was greater than the humiliation. Trembling, she slid off her chair. With the dog's bowl beside her, she knelt on the cold marble floor, trying to understand if this was a punishment or a lesson. Alice's world shrank to the space between her knees and the china plate on the floor. The marble was cold and hard, an undeniable reality against her skin. The smell of Apollo's dog food was strong, earthy, and it mixed sickeningly with the delicate aroma of the fish she was supposed to eat. Apollo, the dog, came closer and sniffed her, confused, wagging his tail slowly before letting out a low whine, as if he too knew that something was deeply wrong. Alice raised her hand, her fingers trembling. Humiliation was a hot wave rising up her neck, but Beatrice's command was a stronger force. "Eat," her stepmother repeated, her voice uninflected, like the ticking of a clock. Alice's fingertips were an inch from the mashed potatoes when a sound echoed through the house. A metallic, familiar sound, but one that in that instant seemed as loud as a church bell. The sound of a key in the front door lock. The door opened. Beatrice froze, her entire body stiffening. Her eyes widened in panic. Richard walked in, bringing with him the smell of rain and airport exhaustion. In one hand, he carried a bouquet of yellow tulips, the flowers vibrant against the grey of his suit. He was smiling, an exhausted but genuine smile. The trip to Zurich had been a success. Business had boomed, and his portfolio in euros had grown considerably. He was eager to be home, to the silence and order he paid so dearly to maintain. The smile vanished from his face the moment he turned the corner and saw the scene in the breakfast nook. For a split second, his brain refused to process the image. It was like looking at a surrealist painting. His wife, standing, an expression of frozen horror on her face. His daughter, his little Alice, on her knees on the floor, and a plate of food, identical to what he had eaten in expensive restaurants across Europe. Resting on the marble next to the dog's bowl, the tulips slipped from his hand, falling to the floor with a soft, dull thud. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the rain against the glass. Richard's gaze swept across the scene, his daughter cowering, the scattered food, the dog kibble inches away, and finally his wife's face. He didn't yell. His anger was a silent force, a pressure that seemed to suck all the air from the room. He walked slowly, his expensive shoes making a soft, menacing sound on the marble. Ignoring Beatrice, he knelt in front of Alice. The girl looked up, tears finally streaming down her face in silent tracks. He gathered her into his arms, holding her with a force that was both protective and desperate. She clung to him, hiding her face in his neck, and then he said, his voice low, trembling, but loaded with the weight of an unbreakable promise, "Never again." Beatrice finally moved, shock giving way to a frantic attempt at control. "Richard, darling, I'm so glad you're home. You won't believe." She tried to force a laugh. It was a misunderstanding. Alice, she was throwing a tantrum, threw herself on the floor, said she wanted to be like Apollo. I was just trying to talk her back to the table. Richard stood up, Alice still secure in his arms. He looked at Beatrice, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the desperate lie in her eyes, the ugliness behind the mask of perfection. A part of him, the part that craved peace and simplicity, almost wanted to believe her. It would be easier. But then he felt the trembling of his daughter's body against his, heard the choked sob she was trying to swallow. He looked at Alice's face and saw a fear that no childish tantrum could explain. The silence that settled between them was heavy, dense, full of unspoken words. He held her tighter, his gaze fixed on Beatrice, a terrible, silent question hanging in the air, waiting for an answer that he knew, deep in his soul, would never come. That night, the Sterling mansion was suspended in a silence unlike any other. It wasn't the white silence of marble or the dark silence of a locked door. It was a dense, grey silence, like smoke from a recently extinguished fire. Richard carried Alice to her room, her small body still shaking with silent sobs. He changed her into the softest pajamas he could find and tucked her under the heavy covers. He sat on the edge of the bed, a position he rarely occupied, and just watched her. Downstairs, he knew, Beatrice would be cleaning the traces of the scene, realigning perfection, preparing her defense. A part of him, the logical, exhausted businessman, desperately wanted to believe her version. A misunderstanding, a tantrum. It would be simpler. A divorce would be a disaster for business, a stain on his public image, a complication in his meticulously organized portfolio. He thought in terms of assets and liabilities, and a family scandal was a massive liability. Beatrice's explanation was the easiest way out, the one that demanded the least of his time and emotional energy. He almost convinced himself. He looked around his daughter's room, the expensive toys, the designer furniture, the best his money could buy. He had always believed that providing was the same as protecting. He had given her a castle, but hadn't realized there was a dragon living inside it. The weariness of his journey enveloped him. Alice finally fell asleep, her face tear-stained, her breathing still uneven. Richard felt a knot in his throat. He felt like a failure. He was a multi-millionaire who could predict market fluctuations, who turned information into fortune, but he couldn't read the signs in his own home. He had failed to protect his most precious treasure. He leaned down to kiss her forehead, ready to stand and face the inevitable conversation with Beatrice, perhaps to accept the convenient lie and move on. It was then that Alice stirred, her lips moving in a dreamy murmur. Richard leaned closer, his heart aching, expecting to hear her call for him, or maybe a sleepy protest, but the words that came from his daughter's mouth in a fragile, broken whisper shattered his denial. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I tried to be good." The sentence was like a key, unlocking a dark door in his mind. It wasn't the lament of a child who had thrown a tantrum. It was the confession of a small soul being crushed under the weight of needing to please. It was the voice of someone who believed she was to blame. In that instant, Beatrice's lie crumbled, and all that remained was the ugly, cruel truth. The return on his investments, the value of his stocks, the security of his capital. It all seemed ridiculous and insignificant. He had built a fortress of wealth around his daughter, but had poisoned her from within. A chill ran down his spine. The anger he felt wasn't hot and explosive, but cold and sharp as a shard of ice. He rose from the bed, his body moved by a new and terrible clarity. He descended the stairs in silence. Beatrice was in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, her posture tense as if awaiting a verdict. She opened her mouth to speak, to try to spin her web of excuses again. Richard held up a hand, silencing her. He looked at her, but he no longer saw his wife. He saw a stranger, a threat. His eyes, which she had always considered his greatest weakness for being too kind, were now as hard and impenetrable as onyx. He said nothing. He simply walked to his study and gently closed the door behind him, leaving her alone in the silent room, with the echo of a closing door and the terrifying certainty that the war had just begun. The following hours dragged on with the slowness of a nightmare. Richard remained locked in his study, the sanctuary of his fortune, now transformed into a torture chamber for his conscience. The spreadsheets open on his computer screen, displaying the growth of his stocks and the cash flow of his businesses, seemed to mock him. He had built an empire, a vast portfolio in dollars and euros, but he had left his own daughter unprotected in his fortress. Guilt was a cold poison in his veins. He remembered discussions with his lawyers about Alice's inheritance, about ensuring she would be financially secure for the rest of her life. What an irony! He had worried about her future capital and ignored her present suffering. Outside the door, Beatrice waited. With every passing minute, her fear turned into a calculated anger. She was not a woman who accepted defeat, the house, the cars, the passive income. It was all part of a plan she had built with the same precision she used to decorate the mansion. She would not let a childish tantrum destroy everything. Finally, the study door opened. Richard emerged, his face pale and his eyes dark with exhaustion and a new, icy determination. "Richard, we need to talk," Beatrice began, her voice rehearsed to sound reasonable. "And you're overreacting. The only conversation we will be having, Beatrice," he interrupted, his voice low and controlled, "is about the new rules of this house. From now on, you will not be left alone with my daughter. Not for a single moment." The next morning was a silent battlefield. Richard insisted on making Alice's breakfast himself. He made the pancakes she loved, cutting them into star shapes, an old trick from when she was younger. Beatrice watched from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, a storm brewing in her eyes. Richard placed the plate in front of Alice. "For you, my princess." Alice looked at the pancakes, then at her father, and a tremor ran through her. She gently pushed the plate away. "No, Daddy." "But it's your favorite," he insisted, his heart breaking. "I'm not hungry," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the table. Richard tried again, offering a piece of fruit. "A glass of milk." The answer was the same. A whispered no, a silent refusal that was louder than any scream. Food, once a source of joy, had become a symbol of her trauma. Miles away, in his modern apartment, Oliver was scrolling through the videos on his phone. He chuckled when he found the recording from dinner. He found Beatrice's line about teaching her to act like a person, a bit sharp, but funny in its own way, thinking he'd share a laugh with a mutual friend. He forwarded the clip with the caption, "Check out Beatrice being the ice queen with her stepdaughter, LOL." The video began its digital journey, jumping from one phone to another, a seemingly harmless joke spreading through the city's elite social network. Meanwhile, Clara, in her small room at the back of the mansion, reread the notes in her journal, her hands trembling with helplessness. She had heard Alice's refusal to eat, had seen the desperation on Richard's face. She felt complicit in her silence. It was then that her phone vibrated on the dresser. It was a message from her niece, who worked as a waitress at high society events. "Auntie, look at this. Isn't this the house where you work?" Below the message was a video file. With her heart pounding, Clara opened it. The screen lit up with the image of the Sterling's dining room. She saw Oliver laughing, saw Beatrice's smile, and then heard her voice, clear and cruel, coming from the tiny speakers. "The girl needs to learn how to act like a person." Clara dropped the phone onto the bed. It wasn't just her word anymore. It was proof. Small, terrible, undeniable proof. Alice's refusal to eat became an invisible barrier between her and her father. Richard, the man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated multi-million-dollar deals as easily as he breathed, felt utterly powerless. He tried everything. He bought her favorite candy, ordered pizzas in fun shapes, even tried to cook himself. turning the pristine kitchen into a battlefield of flour and eggs. But Alice just shook her head, her large, sad eyes fixed on some distant point. Food had become the enemy, and the kitchen, the scene of her greatest humiliation. Beatrice, meanwhile, played the part of the victim with mastery. She moved through the house with a wounded dignity, offering unsolicited advice to Richard. Perhaps if you didn't pressure her so much, dear," she'd say, her voice full of false concern. "She's just seeking attention. Children do that." Every word was a fine needle, pricking at Richard's already throbbing guilt. He ignored her, but the seed of doubt was poisonous. What if he was overreacting? What if a child's memory, especially one as sensitive as Alice's, wasn't reliable? The uncertainty gnawed at him, undermining his newfound resolve. The tension in the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Clara felt it with every step. She guarded the video on her phone like a burning secret. She knew it was a weapon, but one that could easily turn against her. Giving the video to Richard could mean her immediate dismissal, maybe even accusations of blackmail. The sterling fortune gave them immense power, and she was just a housekeeper with a little notebook. The only person she trusted was the family lawyer, Dr. Matthews, an older, calm-eyed man who had handled Richard's legal affairs for decades. He wasn't just a contract executor. There was a decency about him that was rare in that world of wealth and appearances. With her heart in her throat, Clara called his office and made an appointment, saying it was about an urgent domestic matter. On Wednesday, a desperate Richard decided to seek professional help. He scheduled an appointment with a renowned child therapist, Dr. Evans, a woman with a gentle voice and eyes that seemed to see beyond words. He took Alice, who remained silent throughout the session, clinging to her father's hand. Richard explained the situation, omitting the ugliest details, speaking only of his daughter's sudden food phobia. Dr. Evans listened patiently. Then, instead of asking Alice direct questions, she invited her to play with dolls in a small dollhouse. Alice, hesitantly, began to arrange the miniature furniture. She took the doll representing the child and placed it under the kitchen table. At the end of the session, alone with Richard, the therapist was kind but direct. "Mr. Sterling, Alice's refusal to eat isn't about the food. It's a symptom of something deeper. Children with her sensitivity often express trauma in non-verbal ways." She paused, her eyes fixed on his. "I suggest you look closely at her environment. Pay attention to how she reacts not just to people, but to smells, to sounds in the house, especially in the kitchen." The suggestion hung in the air. Smells, sounds. That evening, Richard watched Alice while Clara prepared dinner. The girl was in the living room, drawing. Suddenly, the smell of dog food wafted in from the breakfast nook where Apollo was eating. Richard saw it. He saw Alice's body go rigid. He saw the crayon tremble in her hand. He saw her shrink over the paper as if trying to shield herself from an invisible blow. It wasn't a big reaction. It was almost imperceptible. But for Richard, it was like a flash of lightning illuminating the darkest night. The smell. It was the smell. Beatrice's lie, already fragile, now disintegrated into dust before his eyes. He felt the floor give way beneath him, the certainty of the horror hitting him with the force of a tidal wave. The flash of truth left Richard momentarily blind. Alice's reaction to the smell of kibble wasn't a guess. It was proof etched into her nerves, an involuntary confession from her body. The doubt that had been corroding him evaporated, replaced by a cold, cutting certainty. He felt a wave of nausea as he thought of how close he had come to believing Beatrice's web of lies, how the comfort of an easy solution had nearly made him betray his own daughter. He looked at the empire he had built, the vast network of financial applications, the investment funds he managed with flawless precision. He was a master at calculating risk and assessing the value of assets. But he had failed at the most crucial evaluation of all, the character of the woman with whom he shared his life. The anger he felt wasn't explosive, but a subterranean force, powerful and focused. He knew now that he needed more than intuition. He needed a strategy. The next day, Clara sat in the waiting room of Matthews and Associates law firm. The atmosphere was the opposite of the Sterling mansion. Instead of cold marble and glass, there were dark wood panels, worn leather armchairs, and the comforting smell of old books and coffee. It was a place that spoke of tradition and discretion, not of ostentatious wealth. When she was called in, her heart was pounding. Dr. Matthews received her with a kind nod, indicating the chair in front of him. He was the guardian of much of the Sterling family's treasure, the architect behind the complex arrangements that protected Alice's inheritance. Clara, her hands trembling, began to speak. She told him everything, from the rice incident to the locked doors, her voice occasionally breaking. Dr. Matthews listened without interruption, his face a mask of professional neutrality. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment. "I understand your concern, Clara, but these are very serious accusations, based on your observations." "I know," she said, her voice gaining strength. "That's why I brought this." She placed the small notebook on the polished mahogany desk. Dr. Matthews picked it up and began to flip through the pages. The expression on his face changed subtly as he read the dated entries, the methodical documentation of a quiet, escalating cruelty. He looked up at her, a new respect in his eyes. "This is remarkable." "There's one more thing," Clara said, taking out her phone. "It's not much, but it's her voice." She pressed play. The sound of Oliver's laughter and Beatrice's casually venomous voice filled the quiet office. "The girl needs to learn how to act like a person." Dr. Matthews watched the clip twice. The second time, he closed his eyes, as if to focus solely on the audio. When he opened them again, the professional mask was gone. In its place was a cold, resolute indignation. He looked at Clara, not as a lawyer looks at a client's employee, but as one human being looks at another who has shown immense courage. "You don't want money, do you?" he asked, his voice low. "No, sir," Clara answered, tears finally welling up. "I just want the little girl to be okay. I want justice." Dr. Matthews nodded slowly. "Justice is exactly what she will have." He stood, his decision stamped on every line of his face. "Thank you, Clara. You did the right and bravest thing. I'll take it from here." As soon as she had left, he picked up the phone and dialed Richard's cell. When Richard answered, Matthew's voice was grave and firm. "Richard, come to my office immediately. Leave Beatrice at home. We have a serious problem, but thankfully, we now also have a solution." Richard drove to the law office feeling a mixture of dread and relief. The call from Matthews was a sign that the storm brewing within the walls of his house was about to break. When he arrived, the lawyer was waiting for him with an expression that left no room for small talk. On the mahogany desk sat two items, Clara's notebook and a tablet. "Richard, sit down," Matthews said, his voice somber. "What I'm about to show you will not be easy to see." He opened the notebook. Richard recognized the neat handwriting of his housekeeper. He began to read, and with each turned page, another layer of his ignorance was stripped away. The entries were precise, factual, but together they painted a picture of systematic and chilling psychological abuse. The dates, the times, the small humiliations, it was all there, documented with painful clarity. The mention of the locked doors hit him like a punch to the gut. He remembered the nights he'd come home late and found his daughter's bedroom door closed. Beatrice had always said it was so the noise wouldn't wake her. A simple, plausible lie he had swallowed without question. His world, built on business logic and the security of his net worth, began to crumble. The profitability of his market shares seemed like a cruel joke in the face of the suffering that had occurred under his own roof. When he finished reading the notebook, he was pale, his breathing shallow. Matthews then turned the tablet toward him and pressed play. The familiar dinner scene appeared on the screen. He heard Oliver's laugh and then his wife's voice, casual and murderous. The girl needs to learn how to act like a person. The phrase, heard coldly, outside the context of a social chat, revealed its full malice. The video was the final confirmation, the seal on the truth Clara's notebook had unveiled. Richard closed his eyes, a sharp pain piercing his chest. "I can't believe it," he whispered. "Believe it, Richard, and thank Clara for having the courage that we men with power and money so often lack." Matthews turned off the tablet. "Now we have what we need, not for a public court battle, which would be devastating for Alice, but for a quiet, definitive solution." For the next 2 days, Richard and Matthews worked in secret. Matthews drew up the divorce papers with ironclad confidentiality clauses and a settlement that left Beatrice with nothing more than what she had brought into the marriage. Richard, meanwhile, began to plan the final act. He felt he needed more than just a legal separation. He needed a kind of moral justice, a moment when Beatrice's mask would fall not just for him, but for those whose respect she valued so highly. The idea came to him, clear and terrible in its simplicity. He would call Beatrice's parents her sister. He would host a reconciliation dinner, one last performance in the theater of appearances that was his home. He told Beatrice that he had spoken with Matthews and realized he had been overreacting, that the stress from work had gotten to him. He apologized. Beatrice, triumphant, accepted his apology with condescending magnanimity. Believing she had won, she embraced the idea of the dinner with enthusiasm. It would be the perfect opportunity to reassert her position, to show her family how she had tamed the powerful Richard Sterling and his difficult daughter. On the night of the dinner, the house was impeccably arranged. The table was set with the finest china. Beatrice's family arrived, loud and full of smiles. They toasted to family and to overcoming small misunderstandings. Alice, at her father's request, was present, wearing a simple, comfortable dress, seated beside him. Beatrice was in her glory, telling stories, accepting compliments on the decor, the personification of the perfect hostess. In the middle of the main course, Richard stood, glass in hand. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, his voice calm and steady. Everyone turned to him. "I'd like to make a toast to Beatrice for teaching us so much about the true meaning of family and proper upbringing." Beatrice beamed, radiant. It was then that behind her, the enormous television screen in the living room, which usually displayed tranquil landscapes, flickered to life. Oliver's smiling face filled the screen, followed by the image of the dinner table, the white lilies, a version of Beatrice from a few days prior, wearing the same radiant smile she wore at that very moment. The sound of casual conversation filled the room, overriding the silence that was beginning to fall. Beatrice's family turned, curious, some chuckling, thinking it was some kind of joke, a montage Richard had prepared. Beatrice, however, froze, her smile petrified on her face. She recognized the scene, the dress, the glasses. A cold panic began to creep up her spine. She looked at Richard, who remained standing, his face as impassive as a marble statue. The video continued. The amateur camera wobbled slightly, and then Beatrice's voice rang out, crisp and cruel, echoing through the silent room. "We're working on her table manners. Children are like little animals, aren't they? You have to train them. The girl needs to learn how to act like a person." On the screen, the small Alice shrank in her seat. In the dining room, the real Alice squeezed her father's hand under the table. Oliver's laughter, coming from the television, sounded obscene in the dead silence that followed. The smiles vanished from the faces of Beatrice's family, replaced by expressions of shock and embarrassment. Her father, a man of rigid posture, looked at his daughter as if he had never seen her before. Her mother brought a hand to her mouth. The laughter died, The ambient music stopped. The only sound was the soft hum of electronics. Beatrice shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. "Turn it off! Richard, turn that off now!" she hissed, rushing toward the television as if she could stop the truth with her bare hands. But Richard had prepared for this. The video wasn't playing from a normal device. It was on a loop, the cruel phrase echoing once, twice, 3 times. It was then that a second voice joined the recording. A voice no one there expected to hear. It was Alice's voice, recorded by Richard the night before while she played with the therapist, an audio track laid over the video. The girl's voice was small but clear, describing what she felt. "That's not for me, Mommy," the childish voice said, laden with an infinite sadness. "Food on the floor isn't for people." The juxtaposition of Alice's innocence with Beatrice's cruelty was devastating. The silence in the room became almost physical, an unbearable pressure. Beatrice's family could no longer look at her. They averted their gazes, stared at their plates, wishing they were anywhere else. Beatrice's mask of perfection, so carefully constructed over the years, had shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the shards reflected a monstrous image. At this climax of unbearable tension, in this hall where appearances were once celebrated and wealth was toasted, Dr. Matthews entered. He came not from the front door, but from the side door of the study, like a stage manager stepping onto the stage at the perfect moment. He carried a leather portfolio. With a calm that contrasted violently with the room's emotional chaos, he approached the table and placed 2 documents and a pen in front of Richard. Richard, without taking his eyes off Beatrice's contorted face, took the pen and signed the first document with a firm, decisive stroke. He then pushed the divorce papers across the polished table until they stopped in front of Beatrice. "It's over," he said, his voice no more than a whisper, but it echoed like a sentence. Beatrice looked at the papers, at Richard's face, at the faces of her family who condemned her in silence. She tried to speak, to justify, to attack. "You can't. My lawyer. Your lawyer has already been contacted by mine," Matthews said, his voice calm. "And the evidence is irrefutable. Sign, and you leave with your dignity or what's left of it. Don't sign. And tomorrow this video, along with a notebook full of details, will be made public." She looked to her father for support, but he just shook his head, disappointment etched on his face. She was alone. Richard then knelt beside Alice, who was watching everything with wide eyes, not fully understanding, but sensing the tectonic shift of power in the room. He hugged her and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "In this house, no one eats on the floor. No one will ever laugh at her again." The words were not just for Beatrice. They were a promise to his daughter and a decree to the world. They were the foundation of a new empire, one that would not be measured in money or stocks, but in love and dignity. When the door closed behind the last of Beatrice's family, the silence that fell over the mansion was absolute. It was not a tense or oppressive silence. It was the silence of a vacuum, the space left behind by a storm that had passed. Her family had not offered a single word of comfort, only looks of shame and disappointment before making their hasty retreat, as if humiliation were contagious. Beatrice remained standing in the middle of the room, the looping video on the television casting a cold, flickering light on her face. She was a dethroned queen in an empty banquet hall. "Doctor." Matthews cleared his throat softly. "Beatrice, the pen." She looked at the pen on the divorce papers as if it were a snake. With a sharp, angry movement, she snatched it up and signed her name, her once elegant script now a furious scrawl. She shoved the papers back at Matthews. "Keep the money," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "Keep this glass house and this girl." She couldn't finish the sentence. The word girl died on her lips, stripped of all the power it once held. Without another word, she turned her back, walked up the stairs with an unnatural stiffness, and came down minutes later with a single designer suitcase. She crossed the marble foyer, her heels echoing for the last time, and walked out the front door without looking back. An ordinary car she had called for herself was waiting at the gate. The empire of appearances had fallen. In the days that followed, the house seemed to breathe again. The air grew lighter. Richard devoted every moment to Alice. He cancelled meetings, ignored calls about his fluctuating stocks, and delegated the daily management of his businesses to his subordinates. He realized that while he had been busy building a fortune for Alice's future, he had allowed her present to be stolen. The true inheritance he needed to leave her was not measured in assets or investments, but in safety and love. One morning, he called Clara into the library. The woman entered, her eyes downcast, still unsure of her place in this new configuration. Richard was direct. "Clara, I can never repay you for what you did," he said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "You protected my daughter when I failed. You showed more courage and loyalty than anyone I know." He paused. "I don't want you to be a housekeeper anymore. I would like you to become Alice's governess, her companion, her mentor, with an appropriate salary, of course, but more importantly, with the respect and position you deserve." Silent tears streamed down Clara's face. She couldn't speak, only nod, a feeling of justice and relief filling her. Her little notebook, a diary of conscience, had become the script for a child's liberation. Later, Richard found Alice sitting on the garden swing, watching the clouds. Food was still a barrier, but a smaller one each day. He sat beside her, saying nothing for a long time. Then he took a bright red apple from his pocket. Slowly, with a small penknife he used for opening letters, he began to peel it, the skin coming off in one continuous ribbon. He cut off a small piece and held it out on the palm of his hand, with no word of insistence, just a silent offering. Alice looked at her father's hand, then at his face. She saw a patience there she had never seen before. Hesitantly, she reached out her small hand and took the piece of apple. She brought it to her mouth and took a tiny bite. The sound of her chewing was the sweetest music Richard had ever heard. It was the first piece of a broken world beginning to fit back together. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the dinner, 2 weeks that had transformed the mansion of glass and appearances into a real home. The change wasn't in the expensive furniture or the works of art, but in the air, the light, the sounds that now filled the hallways. Alice's laughter, once a precious rarity, now echoed through the house, mingling with the off-key melodies she and her father played together on the piano. The thick velvet curtains were thrown open, allowing sunlight to flood the rooms, revealing dust motes dancing in the air, small, happy imperfections. The cold marble floor was covered with soft, colorful rugs chosen by Alice. The whiteboard, with its rigid schedule, had been replaced by a magnetic board full of drawings and cheerful reminders. Picnic in the garden and movie night with popcorn. The luxury that once served to impress was now used to comfort. The family's wealth, once a shield against the outside world, became a tool to build an inner sanctuary. Richard discovered a new kind of profit, one that didn't show up on dividend spreadsheets or in the value of his Bitcoin shares, but in the sparkle that had returned to his daughter's eyes. He realized that the greatest asset in his entire vast portfolio was the time he spent with her. On a sunny, lazy Sunday morning, Richard and Alice were having breakfast on the veranda, under the shade of a bougainvillea. The table was simple, the tablecloth plain white cotton, the plates identical. Clara was with them, not as a housekeeper awaiting orders, but as part of the family. Reading a book in a nearby armchair, Alice, a glass of orange juice in her hand, turned to her father, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Daddy," she said, her voice clear and confident. "Can I spill a little bit now?" Richard looked at her, his heart overflowing with a love so deep it almost hurt. Her question wasn't about making a mess. It was about testing her freedom, about making sure that love wasn't conditional on perfection. He laughed, a genuine, liberating laugh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "You can, sweetie," he answered, his eyes welling up. "You can spill as much as you want. This is your home." She smiled, a wide, true smile, and deliberately tilted her glass, letting a single drop of juice fall onto the white tablecloth. It was a tiny orange stain, a vibrant dot of color on the immaculate fabric, and it was the most beautiful thing Richard had ever seen. The house, once a stage for a life of appearances, had finally become a home. The silence, once a weapon of control, was now filled with peace, and the luxury, which could not protect from a lack of love, had found its true purpose: to nurture. The real fortune was not kept in vaults or invested in the stock market. It was right there, on that sunny veranda, in the trust of a little girl who was relearning how to live, and in the love of a father who had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that true elegance is not in keeping everything flawless, but in defending innocence and allowing life, with all its small, beautiful stains, to simply happen.